The coaching carousel, yep, it's already time to start talking about that kind of alliteration. Even though it's early November, we've already seen multiple moves get made. It's already been a fast start. I'll grant you that. We've got USC open, we got LSU open, we got TCU now open, but there are major eyes in the coaching industry on the states of Texas and Florida. And the reason is because as fast as the start has already been to the coaching carousel, it could get really crazy. I mean, it could get really, really wild. It could go from just garden variety crazy to kind of earth tilting crazy. So here's what's happening. Inside the industry, no one knows what's going on at Florida. No one has a good gauge on it. The best thinking is that Dan Mullen is certainly, not at risk of being fired tomorrow or anything like that. But it feels very weird. Florida, the situation feels very off. And the right things can be said, but if you're close to that program or if you're far away and you're observing it, it doesn't feel right at Florida. Now, what you have that we cannot know that's in play here is we cannot know where Dan Mullen's head is really at. For instance, Dan Mullen's the kind of guy where it wouldn't be the biggest shock in the world if at the end of the year he were to say, I'm going to go try something else at the pro level. I don't know anything about that. I'm not speaking first-handedly. I'm telling you, you can't fully know where his head and heart is. Secondly, you also don't know what would happen if disaster strikes. Example, Florida plays South Carolina Saturday. South Carolina's off a bye. They're at home. Got a night game there, I believe. And Florida's coming in there as like a 17 or 18-point favorite. What happens if Florida loses the game is what I'm asking you. Because right now, if they win out, they can go 8-4. They could be 9-4 with a bowl game win. And they should win every game remaining on their schedule. But what if they don't? What if disaster? What if the worst or beyond worst case starts to unfold? Because I can tell you, if Florida loses Saturday, it's probably a pretty good indication it's because the locker room's no longer there, the team's no longer there, and Dan Mullen has lost critical assets of his team. And at that point, we've seen it happen before, where you go from saying so-and-so is safe to over the span of 4 quarters, and then subsequently, the Monday and Tuesday after that, you just feel it go so sour so quick that you have no alternative. So I can sit here and tell you right now, I think Dan Mullen's safe, but I can also tell you that could change. And I can tell you also there are a lot of people in the coaching industry and the agent industry that are watching that job. So you got Florida there. How about Manny Diaz at Miami, though? That's been one that's most interesting because there are two very clearly differing schools of thought right now. One of them has been Manny Diaz, it's a foregone conclusion. If he loses another game, he's going to be out. Well, that talk happened, and it preceded Miami winning back-to-back games. They won against NC State by a point. Then they go to Pitt. They pulled a 4-point upset last week, and it kind of subsided a little bit. I thought Manny Navarro had a really interesting column with The Athletic this week. It was a couple of days ago. We hadn't spoken about it on this show yet. But he talked about how there is a feeling around the Miami program that barring just total disaster, Manny Diaz is safe this year and maybe beyond. That wasn't my biggest takeaway. And that's not why a lot of eyes are focused on Miami. A lot of eyes are focused on Miami because of something else that was said in that article. Again, it was Manny Navarro. It's over on The Athletic. He quoted people inside the Miami program as saying, if we do make a move, if we had to hire a coach, finances would not be an issue. That is where the differing schools of thought come into play. There is a camp out there, and they're not just, whistling past a graveyard or anything like that. They've got reason to believe this. That camp believes Miami talks a lot, and they got a lot of bluster, but they will not write the check when the time comes. They're not that serious about football. And their track record for a long period of time now has established that. That's one school of thought. You can very well understand why someone would think that. But then there's the other school of thought. The other school of thought is when Donna Shalala was in charge down there, her kind of mode of operation was we will only put into athletics what athletics brings us. We are not dipping into the university coffers in order to fund athletics. Well, that's where the Manny Navarro article comes into play. That's why there's a lot of interest in the coaching industry. A lot of coaches have looked and said Miami's not really all that great a job anymore. But Manny Navarro wrote the other day, the thinking now around Miami is money won't be an issue because they're willing to dip into their health fund down there. And that thing generates 9 figures per year. And if we're willing to dip into that, then all of a sudden, money really isn't an issue if you're serious about it. See, Miami's talked before. Are they serious about it? the thinking in the industry is, number one, if Diaz is let go, and number two, if they're serious about that, all of a sudden Miami becomes an infinitely more attractive place to land. So keep an eye on that, because those are two coaches still in place that people are watching closely, because if one or either of those jobs opens, that's a big ripple effect throughout the industry. TCU's open right now. TCU is viewed as very underrated in the coaching industry. There is a unique combination of things that maybe you've thought about before, maybe you haven't. Number one, it's a really good place to live, okay? It's situated in Fort Worth. So that's just a good place to live, period. But number two, they're in the Big 12. Texas is about to leave. OU is about to leave. There are some people who think that's going to be the best job in the Big 12 once those two exit. The third is you're going to get a really good salary there. You'll have the ability to hire a pretty good staff, and you don't have to deal with the kind of elevated expectation level that exists at some of these traditional powerhouse Power 5 programs. So there's a lot going for that TCU job. And also in the state of Texas, now here's where it could get wild. You got Texas Tech already open. You got TCU already open. And you've got, for instance, Traylor over at UTSA who just got a new 10-year deal. Doesn't really matter a whole lot. He's still in play for these jobs. Sonny Dykes at SMU is in play for these jobs. And so obviously it stands to reason if either of them take either of these jobs, then you got other Texas jobs that just came open by default. So there's this big round robin that, well, it's not a round robin. There's this big ripple effect and chain reaction, if you will, in the coaching carousel just in the state of Texas. There's a good article on 247sports.com about just the state of Texas right now. I'll tell you a name that I heard today that I was kind of asking around and reading around, and a couple of people have floated Billy Napier, head coach at Louisiana right now, for the TCU job. Obviously, that would be contingent on whether or not he got a look at LSU. If he gets the LSU offer, he's going to LSU. But if he didn't, is Billy Napier content with just staying at Louisiana, or would he take the TCU job? I don't know the answer to that. That would be, I think, a little more intriguing an offer and an option on the table for him than you think, given the programs that he has turned down in the past. What about LSU? Where's LSU right now? I think a lot of the legwork has been done behind the scenes. I think Scott Woodward, the AD there, has a clear number one. There are many people who believe that is Jimbo Fisher, and even though Jimbo has turned him down, Bruce Feldman the other day was reporting that, I know what Jimbo said. Scott Woodward, there's some people around LSU who believe you're going to have to tell him to his face. You're going to have to get a no out of Jimbo Fisher to my face. And maybe Jimbo will still do it. I can tell you right now, if Jimbo tells you no, it will not just be no. It'll be no, and then it'll be 4 pages of text after that come out of it. Jimbo Fisher could not use a one-word sentence. There's no way that one-word sentence could ever come out of his mouth. He's just not programmed that way. He's going to tell you no. He's going to tell you why. And he's going to give you 3 other just kind of supporting arguments for why. But if they don't get Jimbo Fisher, now I don't think they will, for the record, so let me state that. But if they don't, I think there's a list of candidates there. And I think some of them have been floated around. I still believe that there are some candidates whose names have not even been spoken that could be in the LSU search. But I do think that they are pretty far down the road, even though it doesn't feel like anything's happening. I think a lot of the legwork has been done to the point where I think you've just got your list and you start going down the list. I think Scott Woodward knows what every one of them would want. I think they've already worked that out internally, and at that point it's just going to be a person A, here's your offer, we got turned down. Person B, here's your offer. That's where they are. USC, I do not think is at that point. USC, I think, is miles behind LSU, not just in terms of the attractiveness of the job. I do think LSU's the better job. But I also think USC is behind LSU in terms of the legwork that they've done. At LSU, there's one dude driving the bus right now. At USC, there's several folks with their hands on the steering wheel, and I still think when it comes to that process, I still think they're deciding what they want and who they want, what those characteristics are, which in and of itself is not the best thing to be saying several weeks into a coaching search. But the more people you get involved, obviously the more messy it could get. Here's what's ridiculous, okay? I had one person telling me when I asked about James Franklin, well, yeah, Franklin was high on their list, but now he's lost a couple of games. Let me tell you something. This is probably common sense. If you have coached for over a decade, and my opinion is still changing on you game to game, I'm the one without a clue, not you. You are who you are. I'm the one without a clue. I'm the one with no business in deciding whether I'm going to hire you or not. If over a decade into your career, I'm still changing my opinion on you over each individual 4-quarter set of football. That can't be what's happening there. I hope that's not what's happening there, because a good USC is good for me. And so I hope that's not what's happening there. But that's just some of the stuff that we're following here. And that's why when we have a weekend coming up like we have this weekend, just to go back to that Florida game, you may look at Florida at South Carolina and say, I don't really care much about that game. You should. You should. Because what if there is disaster in that game that were to lead ultimately to action being taken on Dan Mullen that leads to Florida hiring a new coach that either comes from your program or that new coach takes a coordinator and an assistant coach from your program, takes a couple of recruits from your program. These are keystone programs. What happens there, what happens at Florida, what happens at LSU, what happens at USC, it has a ripple effect that can somewhat impact the entire profession, the entire industry, and the entire sport. So keep an eye on that, because this is that time of year. We're going to be talking about that a lot.